He came to buy a horse. What he found in the last stall of that barn changed everything. A woman, wrists bound to a post with horse rope, bruised, starving, barefoot, holding a jagged piece of broken wood like a knife. She'd been tied there for 11 days, and the man who put her there, the most powerful judge in the territory, he had a legal contract. He had the deputy in his pocket. He had the whole town looking the other way. And the last woman he'd kept? She was buried behind his barn, under a patch of wildflowers nobody thought to question. Now a rancher haunted by a death he caused, a seamstress hiding scars beneath her sleeves for 20 years, and a 19-year-old boy with his mother's rage and a rifle he knows how to use are the only things standing between this woman and a man who believes ownership and love are the same word. The bounty is posted, the credit is cut, and the barn is about to burn. But the woman they tried to erase, she's been writing everything down. Welcome to Cowboy Dusk channel, where the sun sets slow, the stories cut deep, and every tale carries the dust, the danger, and the fierce love of the untamed West. This story reminds us that the most powerful thing you can do for someone in darkness is simply refuse to look away, and that freedom isn't given. It's taken back, one brave choice at a time. If this story stayed with you, press that like button and let it be heard. Leave a comment. Tell us, what moment hit you the hardest? Share this with someone who needs to know their story matters. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Cowboy Dusk and ring that bell. Because when the sun goes down out here, the best stories are just beginning.
The heat came early that summer in Copper Bluff, Montana territory. The kind of heat that cracked the earth before breakfast and turned every breath into something you had to earn. It was the summer of 1883, and the land was hard and dry and honest in the way that only land can be, which is to say it did not care whether you lived or died on it. It simply waited. Silas Calloway rode into town at first light the way he always did. Alone, unhurried. Sitting tall on a bay gelding that moved like it already knew the road and had made its peace with it. He wore a wide-brim hat that did not belong to him. It had belonged to his wife Margaret, who had bought it for him at a trade post in Billings the spring before she died. He wore it every day. Not for shade, for her. The road into Copper Bluff wound through dry sage and fence lines, and past a small cemetery set on a hill beneath an old elm tree. Silas slowed the gelding as they passed. He looked at the elm. He looked at the mound of earth beneath it where Margaret lay. He did not stop. He did not speak to her. He had stopped speaking to her grave 6 months ago because he no longer believed he had the right. 3 years earlier, on the night Margaret died, Silas had not been home. He had been at the saloon in town 4 miles away, drinking whiskey to drown a memory that would not stay under. The memory of a boy, a Nez Perce boy, no older than 14, running toward a creek during the Battle of Bear Paw with an empty rifle in his hands. Silas had pulled the trigger. The boy fell face down in the shallow water. That water followed Silas into every glass he lifted. He drank that night because the boy had come to him again in a dream, and the dream was too clear. He drank until the saloon closed. He rode home at dawn. The cabin was cold. The fire had gone out hours before. Margaret was in the bed, still and white, and already beyond anything he could do for her. The cup of water she had asked for that morning was still full on the bedside table. She had died of fever, alone, while her husband sat 4 miles away trying to forget a different death. He had not forgiven himself. He did not intend to. That was the wound Silas Calloway carried beneath his bad shoulder, beneath the hat, beneath the silence that had carved the conversation out of him the way river water carves stone. Slowly, completely, without apology. He had looked away from his own life at the one moment it needed him most. Everything he did now, every choice, every refusal to turn his back was not goodness. It was penance. And he knew the difference, and it sickened him. He was here this morning for a horse, a draft horse. Belgian, broad-shouldered, strong enough to pull timber from the North Ridge before autumn set in. Without that timber, he would have nothing to sell come winter. Without winter money, the bank in Helena would call in the note on his ranch. Without the ranch, Margaret's grave would belong to someone else. The stakes were simple and real, and they started with a horse. Judge Emmett Crane had one for sale. 16 hands, fair price, or so the word went. Silas did not like Crane. Nobody did exactly, but everybody needed him. Crane owned the land office, the courthouse, half the storefronts on Main Street, and enough debt notes to keep every rancher in the territory polite. He was the kind of man who smiled when he had you cornered and called it hospitality. He read scripture on Sundays and held men's livelihoods in his desk drawer Monday through Saturday. But a horse was a horse, and Silas needed one. He tied the gelding outside Crane's barn and stepped through the wide door into the dim. Inside, the air was thick with hay dust and manure and old leather and the sour tang of summer sweat baked into timber. Flies droned against the light that came through the slats in long gold bars. The barn was large, 12 stalls on either side of a center aisle, packed dirt floor, the smell of animals and grain and something underneath it all that Silas could not name, but that made the skin at the back of his neck tighten. He moved down the center aisle, boots slow on the ground, stalls on either side, a roan mare here, a paint gelding there. Nothing Belgian, nothing worth a 4-mile ride at first light. Then he heard it. Not a horse sound, not hooves, not the shift of weight on straw, not breathing through wide nostrils. This was smaller, tighter. A human breath, ragged and shallow and deliberately muffled. The breathing of someone trying not to be heard. Silas stopped. He did not call out, did not rush. He turned his head toward the last stall on the left where the light did not reach. He stepped closer, slow and quiet. The way a man moves when he already knows what he is about to find will not be good. Behind a wall of stacked hay bales in the back corner of the stall where the shadows pooled thick as water was a woman. But she was not crumpled on the ground waiting to be found. She was pressed against the back wall, wrists lashed to the post with braided horse rope pulled tight enough to carve grooves in her skin, and in both tied hands she held a jagged piece of broken board like a knife, a weapon she had made from whatever the stall would give her. She was young. Maybe 23, maybe 25, hard to tell under the damage. One eye swollen half shut. A bruise across her jaw faded to yellow-green at the edges, which meant it was not new. Lips cracked, hair matted with hay and dust. No shoes. Her feet were blistered, the ankles scabbed where rope had been before. But her back was straight, straight as a fence post, and her one good eye locked onto Silas with something that was not fear. It was the focused, feral calculation of a creature deciding whether to strike. She did not scream, did not beg, did not cry. She raised the wooden shard toward his throat and waited. Silas crouched, slowly. He raised both hands, palms open, fingers spread. She flinched hard, her whole body jerking against the rope. The shard did not waver. "I ain't here to hurt you," he said. She said nothing. Her eye measured him the way a trapped animal measures anything that moves, calculating whether this was another threat or just the next one. He drew the knife from his belt. Her breath caught. He paused. Let her see it. Let her see him turn the blade toward the rope and not toward her. He held it there so she could study it, so she could see the intention in his hands before he moved. Then he cut. The rope fell away in 2 pieces. She pulled her wrists to her chest and held them there, trembling. Not from cold. It was 90 degrees in that barn. From something deeper, something that lived inside the bones. But she kept the wooden shard. She did not let it go. "Can you stand?" he asked. She did not answer. She stared at him like she was calculating a price. "There ain't a price," he said, as if he had read her mind. Behind them, footsteps, the sharp click of hard-soled shoes on packed earth. Not boots, dress shoes. The kind no honest rancher wore. Silas did not turn around. He watched the woman's good eye shift past his shoulder, and he saw the change in her face. The calculation sharpened into something older and colder, recognition and hatred. Well now, the voice came smooth and cool, the way cream slides off a silver spoon. Judge Emmett Crane stepped into the barn like he owned the air inside it, which technically he did. He was tall, lean, silver-haired, clean-shaven. His coat was pressed, his collar white. He carried a cane he did not need and a smile that served him better than any weapon. He did not look at the woman, not once. "Silas Calloway," Crane said, tipping his head the way a man tips it when he wants you to feel welcomed and warned at the same time. "You are early. The Belgian is in the east paddock. Fine animal. You will be pleased." Silas did not stand. He was still crouched beside the woman, the cut rope at his feet, her blood on the frayed ends. "What is this?" Silas said. Not a question, an accusation. Crane glanced down. His smile did not waver, but something behind his eyes moved, the way a snake shifts its weight before it strikes, while holding perfectly still. "That," Crane said, "is a private matter. She is under a legal arrangement." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document. He opened it, held it out so Silas could see. A contract, signatures, a county seal, a witness mark, Vernon Sheridan's name at the bottom, and beside it the official stamp of the county clerk. "Her stepbrother signed this 3 months ago," Crane said. "A labor contract in exchange for debt settlement. $200. Legal, filed, witnessed by Deputy Teague himself. She is bound to this arrangement until the debt is cleared." He folded the paper and slipped it back into his coat. "Now, do you want the Belgian or do you not?" Silas looked at the contract. He looked at the law. And he knew, standing there in that barn with the dust spinning in the light, and the flies droning and the woman bleeding from her wrists, that Crane was right. The paper was clean. The law in Montana Territory did allow labor contracts. On paper, this man was within his rights. Then Silas looked at the woman, at the grooves the rope had carved, at the bruise on her jaw that was weeks old, at the eyes swollen half shut, at the blisters on her bare feet and the shard of wood she still held in her fists, because even tied to a post for 11 days, she had not stopped fighting. He stood, slowly, the way a man stands when he wants you to see every inch of him rise. He was taller than Crane, broader. His bad shoulder sat lower than the other, but the rest of him was solid as the ground he stood on. "I don't want the horse," Silas said. He stepped back, extended his hand to the woman, not demanding, just there. She looked at his hand for a long time. Then she stood on her own, winced, steadied, stood. They walked toward the barn door. Crane did not shout. He did not threaten. He stood in the shadow of the stall and said quietly, just loud enough for Silas to hear, words that would follow both of them for weeks. "You know the last girl also left. Name was Liddy. She also thought she could just walk out." And he smiled. Silas stopped. For one heartbeat, the world held still. The flies stopped. The light stopped. Everything stopped except the sound of the woman breathing beside him, fast and shallow and alive. Then he kept walking. Outside, the sun hit them like a wall. The town was already stirring. Wagons creaking, doors opening, the smell of bread from the bakery down the street. Silas helped the woman toward his wagon. She climbed up without his help, pulled herself onto the bench with arms that shook but did not fail, and sat rigid with her hands in her lap, the wooden shard still gripped in her right fist. Silas climbed up beside her, took the reins, clicked his tongue. The gelding moved. They did not speak for the first mile. Dust rose behind them in a slow golden cloud. The road wound through dry grass and fence lines, and the occasional cluster of cottonwoods offering shade neither of them reached for. Then, without turning her head, the woman spoke. Just one sentence, dry and cracked as the road beneath them. "There was a girl named Liddy. Ask him about Liddy." Then she went quiet, and Silas understood that he had not simply cut a woman loose from a post. He had stepped into something darker than a horse barn, and the rope was only the part he could see. Nell Sheridan had been drinking from a horse trough for 11 days. So when the stranger set a cup of clean water on the table and walked out without a word, she did not drink. She sat and stared at it and waited for the price. There was always a price. That was the one thing life had taught her with absolute consistency. Her father had given her books and reading and the belief that she mattered, and the price was losing him to a copper mine collapse when she was 16. Her stepbrother Vernon had given her a roof in Helena, and the price was being handed over to a stranger in a wagon with no explanation and no goodbye. Judge Emmett Crane had given her a clean room and a meal on a white plate, and the price was everything else. So she sat at the table in the stranger's cabin and looked at the cup of water and did not touch it. The cabin was small and sturdy. Log walls, tin roof, a chimney that leaned slightly east. One room for living, one for sleeping, a kitchen barely wider than a closet. Nell catalogued it the way a prisoner catalogues a cell. 2 exits, front door, bedroom window. 1 weapon within reach, the fireplace poker leaning against the stone hearth. 7 steps from the table to the door. She counted them twice to be sure. She noted the lavender shawl folded in a drawer that was slightly open, faded and untouched, the kind of thing a man keeps because throwing it away would make the loss official. She noted the 2 chairs at the table, but only one had a wear mark on the seat. She noted the smell of the place, cedar and old soap and dust, and something underneath that she could not name but recognized anyway. Loneliness. The smell of a house where one person has been breathing alone for too long. The cup of water sat in front of her, catching a beam of light from the window. She did not drink. Her mind went to the first night at Crane's house, unbidden, the way bad memories move. Not because you call them, but because they know the door is open. Crane had been polite. He had set flowers on the dining table, wild flowers, purple and yellow in a clay vase. He had pulled out her chair and said, "Welcome home." He had served dinner on a white plate, venison and potatoes. And he had asked her about Helena, about the boarding house, about what books she had read. He smiled when she answered. He listened like her words mattered. That first night she had almost believed it, almost believed that this was what Vernon had said it would be. A fair arrangement. Work in exchange for a roof and meals. And when the debt cleared, she would be free. The flowers on the table looked real. The food tasted real. Crane's courtesy felt real. And that was the cruelest part. Because when things changed, when the politeness turned to something else, she doubted herself first. Was I wrong? Did I misread him? Maybe this is what kindness looks like, and I have just forgotten. The false gentleness had done more damage than any rope, because it made her question her own mind. And once you start doing that, the cage builds itself. She shook the memory off, pressed her palms flat against the table. This table, this cabin, this stranger named Silas Calloway, who had cut her loose and driven her away from Crane's barn, and set a cup of water in front of her and walked outside without asking for a thing. She heard him moving on the porch, the scrape of a chair, the creak of weight settling into wood. Then nothing. Just the sound of a man sitting still and watching the road. The afternoon passed. Nell did not move from the table. She listened to the cabin, the tick of timber settling in the heat, the hum of insects through the walls, a distant hawk somewhere above the ridge. She studied the room for what it would tell her about the man who lived in it. The shelf beside the door held 3 books, spines cracked, pages soft with rereading. A leather mending kit lay half open on the windowsill, a bridle in mid-repair. His boots, the ones he was not wearing, sat beside the door aligned perfectly, toes pointing out. A man who was ready to leave at any moment. Or a man who had been a soldier and never unlearned the habit. She noticed the bad shoulder when he came back inside in the late afternoon. The left one hung lower than the right, and he moved it carefully, the way you move a thing that hurts but that you have trained yourself not to favor. He filled a basin from the water barrel, washed his hands, dried them on a cloth. His movements were precise and unhurried. He did not look at the lavender shawl. His eyes passed over the drawer where it lay as if there were a hole in his vision exactly that shape. He sat in his chair at the table, the worn one. Nell sat in the other. He did not speak. He cut bread, sliced a piece of hard cheese, set it on the table between them. Then he angled his body toward the door, just slightly, the way a man does when he is always half ready to be somewhere else. She saw it then, recognized it the way you recognize your own handwriting on a page you do not remember writing. He was trapped, too. His prison was just invisible. Built not from rope and timber, but from guilt and silence, and 3 years of punishing himself for something she did not yet understand. She picked up the bread, ate, slowly, deliberately, the way you eat when you are teaching yourself that food does not come with conditions. When evening came, the light in the cabin turned gold and then amber, and then the color of old copper. Silas stood, went to the bedroom door, opened it. Inside, she could see a narrow bed, a quilt, a window that looked south toward a hill. "There is a bolt on the door," he said. "From the inside. You can use the room. I will sleep out here." "Sleep out." "Why?" she said. He leaned against the door frame. His face was in shadow, but his voice was clear. "Because 3 years ago, I was the one sitting on the floor. And nobody came." He walked to the porch. She heard him pick up the rifle. Not the sound of a man settling in for rest. The sound of a man standing watch. He knew Crane would come. Maybe not tonight, but soon. The rifle was not for her comfort. It was for her safety. There was a difference, and she understood it. Night fell over the ranch and filled the cabin with darkness. Nell bolted the bedroom door from the inside and stood with her back against it, breathing. Just breathing. The bolt was warm under her fingers. The room smelled like cedar and old soap, and the ghost of lavender from a shawl that would never be worn again. She did not sleep. She lay on the bed and listened. Heard the creak of the porch under Silas's weight. Heard the night sounds, crickets and wind, and the gelding shifting in its stall. Then she heard something else. His voice. Low, almost inaudible. She pressed her ear to the wall. He was talking to someone who was not there. "I found someone in the barn today. She reminds me of you. Not because she is like you, but because she looked at me the way you looked at me that last morning. Like she was asking whether I would be there when it mattered." A long pause. The wind shifted. "I do not know if I will be. I was not there for you, but I am trying. That is all I have got." Nell pulled away from the wall. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling, and something moved in her chest that she had not felt in weeks. Not trust. Not yet. Something before trust. The cautious recognition that the person on the other side of the wall was carrying a weight of his own, and that maybe, for the first time since Vernon's men put her in that wagon, she was not the only broken thing in the room. She fell asleep with her hand on the bolt. And for the first time in 11 days, she did not dream of rope. She dreamed of a cup of clean water sitting on a table, and nobody asking her to pay for it. Tom Birch rode in before breakfast with news that Crane had put a price on Nell's head. $20 to anyone who brought her back. Silas thought about the number and realized it was cheaper than the horse he had come to buy. Tom was 19. Sun dark, skinny as a whip, earnest in the way that only boys who have buried their mothers too young can be earnest. He had worked for Silas 2 seasons, mending fence, moving cattle, doing the work that needed doing without being told and without complaint. His mother had been a washerwoman in Bozeman, worked for a man who paid her half what he owed and called it generous. She died still owing money to a man who had more of it than he could spend. Tom was 12 when they put her in the ground. He had been angry ever since, the kind of anger that lives quiet in the bones and waits for something worthy to attach itself to. He pulled up his chestnut mare hard in the yard and did not dismount. His face carried something Silas did not like. "Mr. Calloway, we got a problem." Another one. Crane is talking. All morning. He is at the saloon buying drinks and shaking hands and telling everyone you kidnapped that girl. Says she is under legal contract and you stole property. He has got Deputy Teague writing it up. Silas set down the bridle he had been mending. That is not all, Tom said. He shifted in the saddle and his eyes went to the cabin door where Nell had appeared, standing half hidden behind the frame, listening. He has cut your credit at Potts's store. Henry Potts told me this morning, no more supplies, no flour, no seed, no nails, nothing. Crane sent word to every merchant on Main Street. Anyone who sells to you answers to him. The air between them went tight. On the frontier, credit was not a convenience. It was survival. A rancher without credit at the general store was a rancher on borrowed time. Without supplies, he could not feed himself, could not repair what broke, could not prepare for winter. Crane had not just slandered him. He had put a clock on his ranch. Nell stepped out of the doorway. She was wearing one of Silas's spare shirts, too big in the shoulders, tucked into her mended dress. Her feet were still bare. The blisters on them were raw and angry in the morning light. "How much is the bounty?" she asked. Her voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a woman who had learned to keep the shaking on the inside. $20, Tom said. He looked at her and looked away fast, like he had been caught staring at something he should not. $20. Nell repeated it like she was tasting something bitter. That is what I am worth to him. That is what he is willing to pay to own you, Silas said from the porch step. There is a difference, Tom cleared his throat. There is one more thing. Crane is offering a reward. Yes, but he is also telling people, and I'm sorry, ma'am, but he is telling people that that Mr. Calloway is keeping you here for personal reasons. Nell's jaw tightened. She did not ask what kind of reasons. She knew. Silas looked at Tom. You thinking about collecting? No accusation in it. Just the question laid flat on the ground between them like a card turned face up. Tom's jaw set. No, sir. I am not. Then ride back to town. Find Ruth Adler at the sewing shop. Tell her I'm coming in this morning and I would appreciate a word. Tom nodded, turned the mare, and rode. Nell came down the porch steps. The dirt was warm under her bare feet. She stood in front of Silas and looked at him with that one good eye, the swelling around the other one slowly fading from purple to yellow to the color of old storms. I should go, she said. No. Silas, listen to me. He has cut your credit. He has put a price on my head. He is telling the whole town you are keeping me for whatever he is telling them. I am costing you everything. Silas picked up the bridle and ran the leather through his fingers. He did not look at her when he spoke because looking at her made it harder to keep his voice steady. You are not costing me anything. Crane is. And Crane was going to come for this ranch sooner or later, whether you were here or not. He has been buying up every piece of land in this valley for 10 years. You just gave me a reason to stop being polite about it. She stared at him. He could feel her stare on the side of his face like heat from a stove. That is a hell of a reason, she said. He almost smiled. Almost. They rode into town on the wagon. Nell sat straight on the bench, chin up, shoulders squared. She was barefoot and bruised and wearing a dead man's shirt, and she looked like she was riding into battle. Maybe she was. Copper Bluff was awake when they rolled down Main Street. Heads turned, curtains moved. A woman at the mercantile pulled her child inside. Two men on the porch of the saloon stopped talking mid-sentence and watched them pass with the kind of attention that is not curiosity but judgment. Nell felt every gaze like a hand on her skin. Pity was the worst of it. Judgment she could fight. Pity just made her small. Silas pulled up outside Ruth Adler's shop, a small storefront with a painted sign that read Adler Mending and Tailoring in letters that had seen better days. He did not climb down. This is yours, he said. Nell looked at the door. Then she climbed down from the wagon and stood on the boardwalk. She pushed the door open. The bell above it rang thin and bright. Ruth Adler was behind the counter. Silver hair wound tight, spectacles low on her nose, scissors in her right hand. She looked up and studied Nell the way a tailor studies fabric. Not for beauty, for strength. You are the girl from Crane's barn. I am the woman from nowhere who needs work. Ruth's eyebrow went up. Can you sew? I can learn. Can you show up every morning before I open and leave after I close? Yes. Can you keep your mouth shut when the women in this town walk in here and say ugly things about you to my face? Nell paused. I can keep my hands still. My mouth makes its own decisions. Ruth stared at her. A long measuring stare. Then she reached beneath the counter and set a needle, thread, and a torn shirt on the surface. Fix that sleeve. If the stitch holds, you start tomorrow. Nell sat down and took the needle. Her hands were steady despite everything. She worked quiet and fast, fingers moving like they remembered something her mind had tried to forget. Her mother had sewn. Her mother had died bringing Nell into the world, but somehow the knowledge of thread and cloth had passed through anyway, carried in the blood or the bone, or wherever such things live. She finished. Ruth held the sleeve up to the light, turned it, pulled the stitch. It held. Tomorrow, Ruth said. 6 o'clock. Do not be late. But during that visit, Nell noticed things. Small things that most people would miss, but that a woman who had spent 11 days watching everything for signs of danger did not miss. Ruth wore long sleeves despite the heat, fabric buttoned tight at the wrists. Her hands trembled just slightly when she picked up the scissors. When a man's boots sounded on the boardwalk outside, Ruth's head turned toward the door, and her body went still for half a second before she caught herself. And when Nell reached for a bolt of fabric on the counter, and her own sleeve rode up, revealing the raw rope burns on her wrists, Ruth's eyes moved to the marks and then snapped away so fast it looked like a flinch, like she had seen something she recognized, something she could not bear to look at. Ruth did not explain. She did not confess anything. She simply turned back to her work and said without looking up, "There are shoes in the back, second shelf. They are resoled, but they are sturdy. Take them." Nell found the shoes, plain, brown, practical, a little too wide at the heel, but solid enough to walk on. She pulled them on. "Walk on your own feet," Ruth said from the counter. "Do not carry debt on them." Something passed between the two women in that moment. Not understanding, not yet, but the beginning of it. The sense that Ruth Adler knew something about ropes and barns and men like Crane that she was not saying, not yet. Nell walked out into the sun. Silas was leaning against the wagon, arms crossed, watching the street. "She hire you. She gave me a needle and told me not to be late. That is Ruth's way of saying she likes you. She did not say she liked me. She never does." They stood there for a moment. Then Nell saw him. Across the street, stepping out of the courthouse with a folder under his arm and a smile that could curdle milk. Judge Emmett Crane. He stopped when he saw her, tilted his head like a man admiring something he intended to buy back. He did not cross the street, did not shout, just raised one hand, touched the brim of his hat, and nodded. Nell's blood went cold. Every muscle in her body told her to run, to climb into the wagon, to disappear down that road and never stop. But she did not. She held his gaze across the dust and noise of Main Street. She held it until he looked away. He turned and walked into the saloon, and the door swung shut behind him. Silas took the reins. They drove home in silence. The road stretched out in front of them, baked and cracked and endless. Nell watched it pass beneath the wheels and did not look back. On the way home, she asked Silas a question that had been building since the barn. "How many people in this town watched me get dragged into that stall and did nothing?" Silas did not answer. He did not need to. They both knew the answer was all of them. Nell started writing at night, not because she wanted to remember, but because she was afraid that if she disappeared like Liddy, there would be no proof she had ever been real. She had always written. Since she was 16, since her father died and the world became a place that did not keep records of girls like her, she had kept a journal. Every day. Dates, meals, weather, conversations, dreams. The journal was not literature. It was evidence. Proof that her days had happened, that she had existed in them, that someone, even if that someone was only herself, had bothered to write it down. Crane had taken the journal when she arrived, took it from her satchel along with her clothes, her comb, everything, said she would not need any of it. And for 11 days in that stall, the loss of the journal had hurt almost as much as the rope, because without it she was just a body in a barn. Without it she could disappear, and there would be nothing left to say she had ever been anything else. Now she wrote on the pages Silas gave her. He had a small supply of paper, the kind used for tallying accounts, and he set a stack beside a candle on the table without being asked, as if he understood that writing was not a luxury for her. It was air. She wrote her story. Every date, every name, every bruise. The wagon ride from Helena. The first week at Crane's house. The night he stood in her doorway. The first time she ran. The second time she ran. When she put a fork through Haskell's hand and he hit her so hard her vision went white. The stall, the rope, the 11 days. She wrote it all. And she wrote about Liddy. She had started at Ruth's shop 3 days ago. The work was steady, the rhythm of it calming, needle and thread, and the small satisfaction of mending what was torn. Ruth was not warm, but she was fair, and she did not ask questions Nell was not ready to answer. The shop was quiet in the mornings and busy in the afternoons, and through the stream of women who came through the door carrying their mending and their gossip, Nell began to hear things. A rancher's wife named Mrs. Callahan mentioned in passing, while Ruth pinned a hem, that she had seen a girl at Crane's house the previous winter, young thing, dark hair, quiet. Mrs. Callahan had brought a pie to Crane's door as a neighborly gesture, and the girl had answered, and her eyes were wrong. That was the word Mrs. Callahan used, wrong, like the light behind them had been put out. Another woman, older, whose name Nell did not catch, said she had seen a dress burning behind Crane's property last January. Cotton dress, simple, the kind a working girl would wear. She thought it odd, but she did not ask. Nobody asked Emmett Crane questions. Nell filed these fragments away like stitches in a seam. Liddy Fenn, dark hair, quiet, a dress burned in January, and then gone. Nobody saw her leave town. Nobody asked. On the 4th afternoon, after Ruth closed the shop, Nell did not go home. She told Ruth she needed to walk, which was true, and she walked east along the edge of town to a building she had heard about from a customer that morning. The old boarding house at the end of Sutter Lane. Shuttered, abandoned, the roof sagging on one side. Liddy had stayed there when she first arrived in Copper Bluff, before Crane moved her to his house. Nell climbed through a broken window at the back. Inside, the air was thick with dust and mouse droppings, and the particular smell of a place where life has pulled out and left the shell behind. Broken bed frame, a chair with one leg missing. Water stains on the ceiling in the shape of something that might have been a map of a country that did not exist. She searched, not sure what she was looking for. Proof, connection. Something that would tell her Liddy had been real. She found it on the wall beside where the bed once stood, scratched into the wood with something sharp, a pin or a nail or a fingernail, shallow grooves that you would miss if you were not looking. Liddy Fenn, January 12, 1883. He comes to the door every night. Nell pressed her fingers to the scratching. The grooves were desperate, made in the dark, probably, made by a woman who was already past the point where anyone was going to help her and who was trying, with whatever she had left, to leave a mark. To make sure that if she vanished, the wall would remember, even if the town would not. Nell stood in that empty room and felt something hit her in the chest like a fist. Because she knew. She knew because she had done the same thing. Her journal, her pages, her nightly writing by candlelight, it was all the same act. 2 women, separated by months, doing the one thing they could do to resist disappearing. Writing, scratching, leaving proof. "I see you," Nell whispered to the wall. "I see you, Liddy." She climbed back out the window and walked to Ruth's shop in the last light of the day. Her hands were steady. Her mind was not. The next afternoon, something happened at the shop that she had not expected and could not control. She was stitching a hem at the back table. Ruth was at the counter cutting fabric. The bell rang and a man walked in. An old rancher, white-haired, stooped, harmless as a barn cat. He was there to pick up a mended shirt, but he stopped in the doorway, stood there, backlit by the sun, his silhouette filling the frame. Just standing, looking in, the exact posture, the exact shape. The silhouette of a man standing in a doorway, watching. Nell froze. It was not the kind of freezing where your hands shake or your breath comes fast. It was the other kind. The kind where everything stops. Her needle stopped mid-stitch, her lungs locked. Her vision narrowed to the shape in the doorway, and nothing else existed. Not the shop, not the fabric, not the scissors, not Ruth, nothing. Just the shape, just the door, just the memory of Crane standing in her doorway at night, silent, watching, taking up all the space in the frame and all the air in the room. She could not move, could not speak, could not breathe. Ruth saw it. Ruth did not touch her. Ruth did not call her name. Instead, Ruth picked up her scissors and began cutting fabric. Snip, snip, snip. Steady, rhythmic, deliberate. "You are in the shop, girl." Ruth's voice was calm and flat and certain. "This is the shop. Here are the scissors. That is my hand. That is today. You are here." Snip, snip, snip. Slowly, like waking from a bad dream, Nell came back. Her vision widened. The rancher was just a rancher. The doorway was just a doorway. Ruth was just Ruth, standing behind the counter with scissors in her hand and something in her eyes that looked too much like understanding. The old man took his shirt and left. The bell rang, the door closed. Nell sat there with her hands flat on the table, breathing. Just breathing. Ruth came around the counter. She did not sit. She did not touch Nell. She stood close enough that Nell could feel her presence, the warmth and solidity of another person who was not going anywhere. "That happen often?" Ruth asked. Nell swallowed. "When there is a shape in the doorway, when it is the right shape." Ruth nodded once, as if this was an answer she had heard before, as if she had given it herself a long time ago. She went back to the counter, picked up her scissors, started cutting again. Nell watched her, watched the long sleeves, watched the steadiness of her hands now, compared to the trembling when Crane's name was spoken. Watched the way Ruth kept her back to the door, as if she had long ago decided she would rather not see what was coming than spend her whole life flinching at the sound of it. "Something is in you," Nell thought. "Something old and buried and afraid. And you know what I am carrying because you carried it too." She did not say any of this out loud. Not yet. There would be a time. But not yet. That evening, back at the cabin, Nell told Silas about Liddy. She told him about the fragments from the shop customers, about the boarding house, about the scratching on the wall. She spread it all out on the table the way she had spread her pages, laying the evidence in front of him like a hand of cards. Silas listened. He sat in his chair, and he listened with the patience of a man who understood that some stories need to be told at the teller's pace, and not the listener's. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. The candle flickered between them. "If he hurt that girl," Silas said, "then this is not about a labor contract anymore. This is something else." "I know," Nell said. "I think he killed her." Silas looked at the pages on the table, at the careful handwriting, at the dates and names and details that Nell had assembled from whispers and wall scratchings, and the terrible intuition of a woman who knew what Crane was capable of because she had survived it. "Then we need more than what we think," Silas said. "We need what we can prove." That night, Nell wrote 2 sets of pages. Her own story, 32 pages front and back, every date, every name, everything she could remember. And a second set, everything she had learned about Liddy Fenn. She tied them separately with twine and hid them both in the flour tin at the back of the pantry. If Crane came for her, he would not find words. He would find flour, She lay in the dark that night and listened to the silence. Then, beneath the silence, she heard it. Hoofbeats on the road, slow, deliberate, someone riding a wide circle around the ranch, not approaching, just watching, letting them know they were being watched. Nell gripped the broken board shard she still kept under her pillow. She did not close her eyes until the sun came up. Vernon Sheridan did not come alone. He brought a lawyer from Helena and an offer that almost made Silas say yes. They arrived at noon on a Thursday, Vernon in front on a borrowed horse, his coat stained, his face the color of old candle wax. Behind him, on a proper saddle and a proper mount, a man in a city suit with a leather case and the particular expression of someone who has been paid enough to not care about the details. Silas was splitting wood when they came up the drive. He set the axe down but did not pick up the rifle. Not yet. Vernon pulled up short. He looked at the cabin, at the porch, at the shirt hanging on the line that was too small for Silas and that he knew belonged to Nell. His face did something complicated. Fear and guilt and the particular misery of a man who knows he has done something unforgivable and has come back to the scene of it anyway. "Mr. Calloway," Vernon said. His voice was higher than Silas expected, thinner. The voice of a man who had been hollowed out by something and refilled with whiskey and bad decisions. "Vernon Sheridan," Silas said. He did not offer his hand. "I need to speak with my sister." "Stepsister." The correction came from behind Silas. Nell was standing in the cabin doorway, one hand on the frame, the other at her side. She was wearing the mended dress and Ruth's shoes, and her hair was pulled back with a strip of cloth, and her face was as hard as anything Silas had ever seen on a living person. Vernon looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, something human moved behind his eyes. Then it was gone, swallowed by whatever calculation was running behind them. "Nellie," he said, "do not call me that." Vernon dismounted. Silas stepped between him and the porch. Not blocking, just present. The lawyer stayed on his horse and watched with the professional detachment of a man who was billing by the hour. Nell came down the steps and stood beside Silas. She did not stand behind him. She stood next to him, shoulder to shoulder, which said everything that needed saying about where she was in this particular arrangement. "Say what you came to say," she said. Vernon pulled off his hat and worked the brim between his fingers. "I know I did wrong. I know that. But you do not understand, Nell. Crane, he is not a man you cross. He told me if I did not bring you back, he stopped. His throat worked. He would do to me what he stopped again." Nell watched him struggle. She did not help him. "He already what?" she said. "Already killed Liddy?" Vernon went still. Completely, terribly still. The kind of still that tells you everything a person is thinking without them saying a word. Then he put his hat back on and looked at her with eyes that were empty of everything except exhaustion. "Liddy did not go anywhere, Nell. That is the problem." He said it quietly, steadily, like a man setting down a weight he has been carrying too long. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away. He did not look back. Nell stood in the yard and let the sentence hang in the air. Liddy did not go anywhere. It sounded like it meant Liddy was still in Copper Bluff somewhere, maybe hiding, maybe moved. But something in Vernon's voice and the way he had said the problem made the words heavier than they appeared, like stones at the bottom of a river you could not see until the water cleared. The lawyer dismounted after Vernon was gone. He was a tall man with a neat beard and clean fingernails, the kind of man who had never split a piece of wood in his life and considered that a mark of progress. He approached Silas with the leather case under his arm and a rehearsed expression of reasonableness. "Mr. Calloway, my name is Martin Hale. I represent Judge Crane in a matter of contractual enforcement." "I bet you do." The lawyer opened his case and produced a document. "Judge Crane wishes to resolve this matter amicably. He is prepared to offer the following. All charges of kidnapping and theft of property will be dropped. Your credit with every merchant in Copper Bluff will be restored immediately." And he paused for effect. and the Belgian draft horse originally discussed for sale will be delivered to your ranch at no cost." Silas said nothing. The offer sat between them like a loaded gun on a table. "In exchange," the lawyer continued, "Miss Sheridan returns to the Crane household to complete the remaining term of her labor contract. 6 months. After which she is free to go." He said it the way a man says the weather will be fine tomorrow. As if it were simple. As if the woman standing 3 feet away had not spent 11 days tied to a post in a horse stall. Silas looked at the lawyer, looked at the document, looked at the road where Vernon's dust was still settling. He thought about the Belgian. 16 hands, strong enough to pull timber from the North Ridge. Without that timber, no winter income. Without winter income, the bank calls the note. Without the ranch, Margaret's grave belongs to someone else. The cost was real. It was specific. It was not a story he was telling himself. It was arithmetic, and the numbers did not care about his principles. He thought about it. He let himself think about it because he was not a saint and he was not a hero, and he was a man who was about to lose everything his dead wife had loved, and the offer in front of him would save all of it. He let the temptation sit there in the light where he could see it. He looked at it clearly and completely. Then he looked at Nell. She was watching him, not with fear, not with pleading. She was watching him the way you watch a coin spinning in the air, waiting to see which side it lands on, already making peace with either outcome. "Tell Crane I will drag the timber by hand if I have to," Silas said. The lawyer blinked. He looked at the document, then at Silas, then at Nell. He put the paper back in his case, mounted his horse, and rode away without another word. When the dust settled and the yard was quiet again, Nell said nothing for a long time. Then she said in a voice so low he barely heard it, "You're going to lose this ranch because of me." Silas picked up the axe. Silas picked up the "I'm going to lose this ranch because of Winter. You are not Winter." She looked at him. Something shifted in her face. Not gratitude. She was past gratitude. It was the recognition that he was paying a real price for her freedom, and he knew exactly what it cost, and he was paying it anyway. Not because he was good, because he could not live with the alternative. That night, Nell found Silas on the porch, staring at the dark road. She sat beside him on the step, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, but not quite. "What are you looking at?" she asked. "Nothing. I am making sure nothing comes up that road tonight." They sat together until midnight. Neither spoke. The crickets sang. The gelding shifted in the barn. Somewhere in town, in a study lit by a single lamp, Judge Emmett Crane sat at his desk with a glass of whiskey he had not touched. A desk drawer was open. Inside it, barely visible, a small wooden comb. A woman's comb, cheap, the kind you could buy for a nickel at any general store. He held it in his fingers, turning it over, running his thumb along the teeth. His face held nothing. Not guilt, not pleasure, not memory. Just the blank attention of a man looking at something he cannot explain but cannot put down. Deputy Teague stood in the doorway delivering a set of papers Crane had requested. He saw the comb. He saw Crane's face. Something cold moved through his stomach, the feeling you get when you look over the edge of something you cannot climb back from. He left the papers on the table and walked out without speaking. Back at the ranch, Nell finally stood from the porch step and went inside. She paused at the bedroom door. The bolt was right there, 2 inches from her hand, and every night since she arrived, she had slid it shut and slept with her fingers on it. She left it open, not because she was not afraid, because she had decided there were things more frightening than an open door, like spending a whole life behind a closed one. They found Liddy Fenn on a Wednesday afternoon under 3 feet of earth behind Crane's horse barn, in the exact spot where the wildflowers grew thickest. But first, there was the baker. Nell stopped at Mrs. Norming's bakery every morning before work. It was on the way to Ruth's shop, and the bread was good, and Mrs. Norming was one of the few people in town who did not look at Nell like she was a stain on the street. She was a broad woman, flower-dusted, kind-faced, the kind of woman who expressed everything through her baking and almost nothing through her words. That Wednesday morning, Nell came in for her usual half-loaf. Mrs. Norming was rolling dough. She did not look up. She said, in a voice as flat and steady as the counter she was working on, "Wildflowers behind his barn are growing real pretty this year. Strange, because that ground never grew nothing before." Then she turned away. Nell stood in the doorway of the bakery with the bread in her hand and the morning sun on her face, and felt the sentence settle into her like a stone dropped into still water. Slowly, ring by ring, she understood what Mrs. Norming was telling her without telling her. The wildflowers were not pretty. They were a marker. The ground grew them thick because something had been put into it that had not been there before, something that fed the roots. She walked to Ruth's shop. She worked. She stitched hems and mended seams, and her hands moved and her mind raced. And at the end of the day, when Ruth was counting the take, Nell said, "I need to borrow Tom Birch." Ruth looked at her over the spectacles. "What for?" Nell told her. Ruth listened. Her face did not change, but her hands stopped moving, which for Ruth was the same as screaming. "Go," Ruth said, "but be careful. That man has teeth." Nell rode to the ranch on Ruth's mule. She told Silas what Mrs. Norming had said. She told Tom. The three of them stood in the yard in the late afternoon light and looked at each other and knew they were about to cross a line that could not be uncrossed. They rode to the edge of Crane's property. The barn was visible across the field, its shadow stretching long in the falling sun. Behind it, to the east, was a patch of ground maybe 20 feet across, where the wildflowers grew in a thick carpet of purple and yellow. The same colors Crane had put in a vase on his dining table the night Nell arrived. The thought made her stomach turn. Silas dismounted and walked to the patch. He crouched, pushed the flowers aside. The earth was looser here than the surrounding ground, packed but not settled, the way dirt looks when it has been turned and put back. He pressed his hand flat against it, felt the give. Tom was behind him, shovel already in his hands, ready to dig. "No," Silas said. "We do not dig." Tom looked at him like he was crazy. "If we dig," Silas said, "Crane will say we trespassed on his land and tampered with the site. He will call it destruction of property, and everything we find becomes something we planted. We mark the location. We send word to the sheriff in Fort Benton. We let the law dig." Tom stared at the ground. His jaw worked. Every part of him wanted to put that shovel in the dirt and bring up the truth. "I know," Silas said, "but we do this right or we do not do it at all." Tom lowered the shovel. Nell had not dismounted. She sat on the mule at the edge of the wildflower patch and looked down at the ground where Liddy Fenn lay. She knew it the way you know certain things without proof, in the body, in the gut, in the place where logic and instinct meet and agree. She had almost been under this ground. A few more weeks, maybe a few more days, and it would have been her name scratched on that boarding house wall, her comb in Crane's drawer, her bones feeding the wildflowers. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with something hotter and steadier than fear. She dismounted, walked to the patch, knelt, pressed her palm flat against the earth. "I see you, Liddy," she said. "I am not looking away." Tom rode for Fort Benton that afternoon. Silas and Nell rode back to the ranch. They did not speak. The sun went down and the sky turned copper and blood, and the long shadow of the ridge crept across the valley like a hand closing. That evening they sat on the porch. The silence between them was different now, heavier. The silence of two people standing on the same ground and seeing the same thing beneath it. Then Silas spoke. And what he said was not about Liddy or Crane or the wildflowers. It was about Margaret. He told Nell about the night his wife died. He told her all of it. The saloon, the whiskey, the Nez Perce boy he could not stop seeing in his dreams. The boy running toward the creek with an empty rifle. The boy falling face down in the water. He told her how he drank to drown that boy and drowned his marriage instead. How he rode home at dawn and the fire was out and Margaret was cold and the cup of water she had asked for that morning was still full on the bedside table. I looked away from my own life on the night it needed me most, he said. His voice was rough as gravel road. I cut your rope in that barn not because I am good, because I cannot stand to look away one more time. That is the truth. That is all of it. Nell listened. She did not judge. She did not say it was not his fault, because she knew he would not believe it, and saying it would only make the distance between them wider. Instead, she said something that was harder to say and harder to hear. Margaret died of fever, she said. Not of you. But I understand why you do not believe that. He looked at her. She looked at him. The light was almost gone and their faces were half in shadow, and what passed between them was not romance. It was the thing that comes before romance, the thing that makes romance possible. Recognition. The understanding that the person sitting next to you has seen their own abyss and is still here, still breathing, still choosing to sit on this porch instead of disappearing into the dark. Then something broke in Silas that had been holding for 3 years. It was not dramatic. He did not weep or shout or fall to his knees. He simply stopped being able to sit up. His shoulders dropped. His hands gripped the edge of the porch step. His head bowed. His breathing went ragged, short, and sharp. The breathing of a man whose body is finally letting go of a weight. His mind refused to set down. The smell of the wildflowers had done it. They had smelled like lupine. Lupine had been blooming the week Margaret died, purple and sweet, covering the south hill like a carpet. The smell had been in the cabin when he came home to her body. The smell of wildflowers and death tangled together so tightly he could never separate them again. Nell did not say it is all right. She did not say it is going to be fine. She did nothing that people do when they are trying to fix something that cannot be fixed. She sat beside him and put her hand on the back of his neck and held it there. That was all. The weight of a hand. The warmth of it. The steadiness. She held it there until his breathing slowed, until the shaking in his shoulders stilled, until he was able to sit up again and look at the dark and breathe. The symmetry was not lost on her. He had crouched in front of her in a horse stall and cut her loose. She was sitting beside him on a porch step, holding him together. They were even now. Whatever this was between them, it was no longer a rescue. It was something built on level ground. That night, Nell did not bolt the bedroom door. Not because she was no longer afraid, because she had decided that some doors needed to stay open, so the people on the other side knew they could reach her if the ground gave way. Crane did not wait for the sheriff. He came on Friday night with 3 men and a new length of rope. By then, Tom had been gone 2 days riding hard for Fort Benton. The message he carried was simple. There is a patch of ground behind Judge Crane's barn in Copper Bluff that needs digging. Bring the sheriff. Bring a shovel. Bring the law. Silas did not know if Tom had arrived. Did not know if the message had been delivered. Did not know if Sheriff Coulter would listen, or if he would read Crane's paperwork and decide the law was already settled. He knew only that he had sent a boy into the territory on a fast horse with the truth in his pocket, and that the truth was not always enough. Friday evening in Crane's study, the mask slipped. Deputy Teague stood in the doorway with a stack of papers and watched the judge lose control for the first time in the 20 years Teague had known him. Crane's hand shook when he reached for the whiskey. He missed the glass. The bottle struck the rim and toppled, and the amber liquid spread across the desk like a stain on a map. Crane did not clean it up. He stared at it. They sent someone to Fort Benton, Crane said. Teague said nothing. If that girl talks about the Fenn woman, I am finished. Crane's voice was flat without its usual music. The charm was gone. The smoothness was gone. What was left was something raw and old and frightened. Do you understand that, Walt? If she tells Coulter about that ground behind the barn, it is over. Everything I built. Everything. Teague looked at the whiskey spreading across the desk. He looked at the drawer that was slightly open, the one where the comb was kept. He looked at the man who had held the note on his land for 7 years and who had sat across from him one evening and said with a smile, Walt, you have got a nice place. Clara's got those rose bushes coming in. Shame if the note came due early. "What do you want me to do?" Teague asked, though he already knew. "Tonight," Crane said. He straightened in his chair. The mask went back on, but it did not fit as well as before. Cracks showed at the edges. "Bring Haskell and 2 men. Go to Calloway's ranch. Bring the girl back. I do not care how. And if Calloway objects—" Crane looked at him. His eyes were flat and cold and very, very tired. "Make sure he does not." Teague rode out. He gathered Haskell and 2 ranch hands who worked for Crane and did what they were told. They rode east under a sky full of stars. 4 men on 4 horses with a length of rope and orders that did not need to be spoken aloud. At the ranch, Silas heard them coming. He had been hearing things for 2 nights. The slow, circling hoofbeats from before, the ones that came at midnight and rode a wide loop around the property and left before dawn. Watchers. Crane's men checking the layout, counting heads, measuring the distance from the road to the cabin. He had marked their pattern. He knew they would come. He was on the porch with the rifle when the hoofbeats changed. No more circling. They were coming straight up the drive. Nell was inside the cabin. She had heard them too. She was standing by the back window with a kitchen knife in her hand, her breath steady, her feet planted. The broken board shard was in her other hand. She was done running. Silas stepped off the porch and stood in the yard with the rifle barrel resting on his forearm. The moon was half full and the light was silver, and the 4 riders materialized out of the darkness like something conjured. Haskell was in front. Big man, thick through the chest, the kind of man who did not need to be smart because he was strong and did not need to be brave because he worked for someone who paid him to not think about what he was doing. "We do not want trouble, Calloway," Haskell said. He pulled up 10 yards from the porch. His horse stamped and blew. "Just the girl." "She is not here," Silas said. The lie came easy, the way lies come easy when they are protecting something that matters more than honesty. Haskell looked at the cabin. A candle was burning in the window. A shadow moved behind the glass. "I think she is," Haskell said. The 2 men behind him shifted. One of them had a coil of rope on his saddle. The new rope. The one Crane had sent. Silas thumbed the hammer back on the rifle. The click was small and precise, and it carried in the night air like a stone dropped in a well. "I told you she is not here," Silas said, "and I'm telling you to ride." Haskell looked at the rifle, looked at Silas, calculated the distance, the angle, the odds. 4 men against 1 in the dark, and the one had nothing left to lose. That was the variable that tipped the scale. A man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing on the frontier because he has already done the math and the answer does not scare him. Then a voice came from behind the riders. "You boys want to look over your shoulder for a minute." Tom Birch, standing at the barn door with a rifle of his own, aimed at Haskell's back. He had ridden in an hour before, quiet, unsaddled in the dark, positioned himself without a sound. 19 years old, with his mother's anger and a dead woman's memory, and a Springfield rifle that he knew how to use. Haskell turned in the saddle, looked at Tom, looked back at Silas. 2 rifles, 2 directions, no cover. "Not worth it," Haskell said, "not tonight." He wheeled his horse, the other 2 followed. But Teague, the 4th rider, sat still for a moment. He looked at the cabin. He looked at Silas. His face in the moonlight was the face of a man standing at the edge of a cliff. Then Haskell, passing him, slid a lit torch from his saddle ring and threw it in a clean arc through the barn door. The hay caught first, then the timber, then the air itself seemed to catch, a roar of heat and light that turned the night orange and sent the gelding screaming in its stall. Tom was closest. He dropped the rifle and ran. Silas ran. They hit the barn at the same time, smoke pouring through the door, the heat pressing against them like a wall. Tom found the gelding's stall, threw the latch, grabbed the halter. The horse reared, wild with terror, and Tom held on. He dragged the animal toward the door. The beam came down. A burning rafter, 6 inches thick, collapsed from the ceiling and struck Tom across the left arm and shoulder. He went down. The gelding bolted through the door and into the yard. Silas grabbed Tom by the collar and pulled him clear of the falling timber and out into the night where the air was cool and full of stars, and the barn behind them was a pillar of fire climbing toward the sky. Nell came running with buckets. She had filled them from the water barrel before the riders even left. They worked, all three of them, Nell, Silas, and Tom, with his arm hanging wrong and his face gray with pain. They threw water on the walls of the cabin to keep the sparks from catching. They worked until the barn collapsed in on itself with a sound like the world breaking open, and then they stood in the yard and watched it burn. Dawn came. The barn was ash and charcoal and twisted nail. Tom sat on the porch with his arm wrapped in a strip of sheet, the skin beneath it blistered and raw. The gelding stood at the far end of the paddock, eyes still wide, sides heaving. He had survived. But the feed, the tack, the lumber Silas had been storing, the tools, the winter supplies, all gone. Silas stood in front of the ruins. The heat still came off them in waves. The smell was in everything. Smoke and burned hay and the particular sweet, sick smell of scorched wood. And underneath it another smell. The smell of the night Margaret died, when he had burned compresses on the stove, trying to bring her fever down with cloth and boiling water and prayers that went nowhere, and the cabin had filled with the steam of wet cotton scorching on hot iron. That smell. The smell of trying and failing, and the world burning around you while you stand in the middle of it with empty hands. His knees gave out. He did not decide to sit down. His body simply stopped holding him up. He went down in the dirt in front of the ashes, and he could not get up. His hands were in the dirt, and his head was bowed, and his breathing was the sound of a man who has carried too much for too long, and whose body has finally said enough. Nell came to him. She crouched in front of him. The same position he had taken in the stall when he found her. The mirror was exact, and it was deliberate, though neither of them would have called it that. She crouched, and she looked at him, and she said 2 words. "Look at me." He looked. "You are here," she said. "That is what matters. You are here." She held out her hand. He took it. She pulled him up. And they were even. He had pulled her out of one barn. She pulled him out of another. Then, from the road, hoofbeats, one rider, coming from town. Silas raised the rifle. His arm shook. Nell stood beside him. Deputy Walt Teague came up the drive on a gray mare. His hands were up. No weapon. His badge was still on his vest, catching the first light of the sun. "I saw the smoke from town," Teague said. His voice was rough. His eyes were red. He looked at the barn, at Tom on the porch, at Silas in the dirt, at Nell beside him. "I cannot look away anymore," Teague said. He dismounted. From inside his coat, he pulled a leather-bound ledger, worn and soft at the edges, and held it out to Silas. "Every order," he said. "Every illegal thing Crane has asked me to do in 7 years. Dates, details, names, including the order for tonight. The fire, all of it." Silas looked at the ledger, looked at the man who had signed a false affidavit against him, who had stood beside Crane at every turn, who had been the judge's dog for as long as anyone could remember. The man who had ridden out tonight with the men who burned his barn. "Why now?" Silas asked. Teague's jaw worked. His eyes went to the ash. "My family," he said. "Clara and the children. Crane holds the note on my land. If he finds out I gave you this before the sheriff arrives, he will take everything." Silas looked at Nell. She looked at him. No words were needed. "Bring your family here," Silas said. "Tonight." Teague nodded once. Mounted. Rode. The day passed slowly. Tom slept on the porch, his arm throbbing, his young face old with pain. Teague returned that afternoon with his wife Clara and their 2 children, a boy of 8 and a girl of 5, wide-eyed and frightened in the back of a wagon loaded with what they could carry. Nell helped Clara settle the children inside the cabin. Silas and Teague stacked what was left of the lumber into a barricade around the porch that would not stop a bullet, but would slow a man down. By nightfall, the cabin held 6 people and felt like a fort. And then, sometime after midnight, when the cabin was quiet and the children were sleeping and Clara was dozing in the chair and Teague was on the porch with Silas, Nell disappeared. She did not take a horse. She did not take a weapon. She left a note on the table, written in the careful hand that had filled 32 pages with truth. I am not running from you. I am running from the price you are paying for me. Silas found it at dawn. He read it twice. His jaw set, his fists clenched, and for the first time in 3 years he felt something other than grief or guilt. He felt anger, not at Nell, at the fact that she was doing exactly what he had done for 3 years. Deciding for someone else that they were not worth the cost, deciding alone. Looking away from the people who had chosen to stand beside her, because she had decided, without asking them, that her presence was a burden they should not have to carry. He saddled the gelding. He rode. He found her at dawn, sitting in the dirt beside a patch of wildflowers on the ground behind Crane's barn, the place where Liddy Fenn lay beneath the earth. She was not crying. She was just sitting there looking at the ground as if she had come to the one place that would show her where this road ended if she kept walking it alone. Silas dismounted. He stood over her. He did not say, "Come home." He did not say, "Don't go." He said, "You do not get to decide how much I can carry. That is my business." She looked up at him. One eye still carried the yellow ghost of the bruise, but both eyes were open, both were clear, and if it breaks you, then you will be there, same as I was for you. She stood, not because he told her to, because the ground was cold and the sun was coming up, and she had decided again for the 100th time, for the only time that mattered, not to disappear. They rode back to the ranch together as the morning light turned the valley gold. Nell wore the dress Ruth had made for her, stitched at night after the shop closed, a simple cotton dress dyed the color of dark clay. No lace, no ribbon, built to last and not to please. And she wore boots that had belonged to a woman she had never met. Silas had set them on the porch that morning without a word. Margaret's boots, cracked at the heel, laces knotted in 3 places, soles worn thin on the left side where Margaret had favored her right leg on uneven ground. They still carried the shape of the woman who had walked through wildflowers in them the last spring she was alive. Nell picked them up, turned them over in her hands, ran her thumb along the stitching the way you run your fingers over words in a letter from someone who is gone. She pulled them on. They fit, not perfect, but close enough to feel like someone walking beside her. Silas was standing by the wagon watching her. He did not explain the boots. He did not need to. She understood what they meant. He was giving her the most sacred thing he owned, the last physical trace of the woman he had loved and failed, and he was giving it to her on the day she walked into court. It meant he believed in what she was about to do. It meant he wanted Margaret there when she did it. "Thank you," Nell said. Not to Silas, to the boots. They rode into Copper Bluff at mid-morning. Silas drove the wagon. Nell sat beside him with her pages in her lap, tied with twine, gripped in both hands. Tom rode alongside on the chestnut mare, his burned arm still in a sling, his face pale but his back straight. Behind them, in a second wagon, Teague drove with Clara and the children, the ledger hidden under the seat. The town was full. Word had spread the way it always does in small towns, fast and distorted and hungry for a conclusion. Folks lined the boardwalks, not quite gathered, not quite scattered. The kind of crowd that pretends it is just passing through while planting its feet. Silas pulled up in front of the courthouse. Wooden building, 2 stories, the only structure in town with a real painted sign. Judge Emmett Crane's name was on it twice. Nell looked at the building, at the name, at the door. "He owns this building," she said. "I know. We are walking into his house and asking his furniture to judge him. We are walking in with the truth. Furniture does not matter." She almost laughed. Almost. Then she climbed down from the wagon and stood on the street with the papers against her chest and the dead woman's boots on her feet and the sun on her face, and she thought, whatever happens in the next hour, I am standing here on my own legs, and nobody put me here but me. Inside, the room was arranged like a courtroom. though it served as the town hall most days. Chairs in rows, a desk at the front, an American flag in the corner. Judge Emmett Crane sat behind the desk like he had been born to it. Silver hair combed back, coat buttoned to the throat, cane resting against his knee. He looked at Nell the way a man looks at a horse he expects to break. Beside him, in a chair pulled too close, sat Vernon Sheridan. He was picking at his fingernails and not looking at anyone. At a separate table to the right sat a man Nell had never seen. Tall, weathered gray mustache, badge pinned to a leather vest. Sheriff Samuel Coulter of Fort Benton. He had a ledger open in front of him and a pen in his hand, and his eyes moved between Crane and the doorway with the patience of a man who had sat through 100 of these and trusted none of them. Tom had reached him. The message had been delivered. Coulter had come. But Nell could see from the way the sheriff looked at Crane's paperwork, the neat stack on the desk, the contract, the seal, the affidavit, that he was not here as her ally. He was here as the law, and the law was written on paper, and the paper favored the man behind the desk. Crane smiled. Silas, glad you could make it. And Miss Sheridan, welcome back. Nell did not return the smile. She walked to the front of the room, stood before the sheriff's table, and set her bundle of papers down. My name is Nell Sheridan, she said, and I am here to tell you what happened to me. Crane leaned forward. Sheriff, if I may. This woman is under a binding labor contract signed by her family representative, transferring rights of labor to me in exchange for debt settlement. The contract is legal, sealed, and filed with the county. She fled my property. She was taken in by Mr. Calloway. I am requesting enforcement. He produced the documents. Contract, seal, signature, affidavit. Everything clean, organized, airtight. Coulter examined them. He nodded. He made a note in his ledger. Nell watched the pen move and felt the floor tilt under her. Miss Sheridan, Coulter said, you have something to say. I have 32 pages of something to say. She untied the twine, spread the pages on the table. Every date, every detail. 3 months of evidence written by candlelight in a dead woman's cabin. 3 months ago, my stepbrother Vernon Sheridan signed a paper he had no right to sign. She told it clean and straight. The contract, the wagon, the first week, the doorway at night, the running, the fork, the stall. 11 days. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She spoke the way Ruth cut fabric, steady, precise, every cut exactly where it needed to be. Then she placed the journal on the table, the leather-bound book Tom had recovered from Crane's study. My journal, she said. I have kept it since I was 16. Every day of my life for 8 years. Judge Crane took it from me the day I arrived. It was recovered from his study. Then the letter, the one Tom had found in Crane's desk. She set it down, and Coulter picked it up and read it. Bring the girl. I will pay $50 upon delivery and forgive the remainder of your debt. She must come willing, or at least appear to. If she resists, restrain her quietly. I do not want attention. Once she is here, I will handle the rest. Destroy this letter. Coulter read it twice. His mustache twitched. He set it down. Crane countered without raising his voice. That journal was stolen from my personal property. The letter was obtained through illegal entry. The handwritten pages are the unsupported testimony of a young woman with no standing. Whatever their contents, the method of their procurement makes them inadmissible. He had a point. Coulter knew it. The evidence was damning in content, but compromised in origin. A good lawyer would have it thrown out. The moment teetered. Then Deputy Walt Teague stood up. The room shifted. Every head turned. Teague had been sitting in the back row, still in his deputy's shirt, his badge still pinned to his vest. Clara sat beside him, her face pale, her hands gripping the hands of their 2 children. Teague walked to the front of the room. He set his ledger on the sheriff's table beside Nell's papers. I want to withdraw my previous affidavit, he said. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. And I want to testify. Crane's composure cracked, a hairline fracture visible only if you were looking. His eyes went to Teague and something in them shifted, the way the ground shifts before a collapse. Teague testified. Every illegal order, every debt threat, every coercion. He told Coulter about the night Clara's rose bushes became a bargaining chip. He told him about the false affidavit. And he told him about Friday night, the order to ride to Calloway's ranch, the torch, the barn. Crane ordered the fire, Teague said. His exact words were, "Bring the girl back. I do not care how." When Haskell asked what to do about Calloway, Crane said, "Make sure he does not object." Haskell interpreted that the way Haskell interprets everything. The ledger corroborated it. Dates, times, names, 7 years of receipts for a man's conscience. Crane opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, something else happened. Something that nobody in that courtroom expected, least of all Nell. Ruth Adler stood up. She was in the back row, shawl over her shoulders, scissors still in her apron pocket. She walked to the front of the room with the slow, deliberate steps of a woman crossing a bridge she has been afraid to cross for 20 years. She did not make a speech. She stood in front of Coulter and the room and the town, and she said in a voice that did not waver, 20 years ago, I came to this town the same way that girl did, young, alone, no family. Emmett Crane took me in. The room went silent, the kind of silence that presses against walls. Then Ruth reached for the cuff of her left sleeve. She unbuttoned it slowly. 1 button, 2, 3, and she rolled the fabric up to her elbow. On the inside of her wrist, old and white and unmistakable, was a scar. A rope scar, 20 years healed but never gone. The same mark that Nell carried on her own wrists. Ruth did not describe what had happened. She did not need to. The scar spoke 20 years of silence into the room, and the room heard every word. I watched him do it again, Ruth said. To Liddy. To Nell. I watched and I said nothing, and that silence is the worst thing I have ever done, so I am saying it now. The room held its breath. Then slowly, one by one, the town began to speak. Not a flood, a trickle. Each voice shaking, each voice ashamed. Henry Potts from the general store stood. He offered me $20 to say I saw Calloway force the girl into his wagon. I did not take it, but I did not report it either. Mrs. Norming from the bakery. I saw his men digging behind the barn last January, middle of the night. I watched from my window and I told myself it was none of my business, one by one, voice by voice. The sound of a town's conscience waking up after a long and willful sleep. Coulter listened to all of it. He wrote in his ledger. His face did not change, but his pen did not stop. When the last voice had spoken and the room had settled into a silence that was not empty but full of everything that had been said and everything that had been unsaid for years, Coulter closed his ledger. I do not have jurisdiction to try a murder case, he said, but I have authority to detain a suspect pending investigation by the territorial marshal. He looked at Crane. Judge Crane, you will be held at the county jail in Fort Benton until the circuit court convenes. You are being detained on suspicion of unlawful imprisonment, fraud, conspiracy, arson, and in connection with the disappearance of Liddy Fenn. He looked at Teague. Deputy Teague. You are suspended pending investigation. I will be recommending charges for the original false affidavit, but your cooperation will be noted. Teague unpinned his badge, set it on the nearest chair. His hands were steady now. The worst was over. Crane did not shout. He did not rage. He stood up from behind the desk with the calm of a man who has been expecting this moment longer than anyone knew. He looked at Nell, and he said the words that proved he was not a monster, but something worse. I gave you a roof. I gave you food. In this world, that is more than most women like you ever receive. And you call me a monster. Nell stepped close. Close enough that Crane had to look down at her. Close enough that he could see the scar on her wrist where his rope had cut. No, she said. I call you a man who built cages and called them houses. And that is worse than a monster. Because monsters know what they are. Crane stared at her. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Coulter took his arm. "Judge, let us go." Crane walked out of the courtroom straight-backed and head high because he still believed he was right. And that was the most terrifying thing about him. Outside in the sun, Nell looked down at the boots on her feet. A dead woman's boots, a living woman's steps. "Thank you, Margaret," she whispered. Then she walked down the courthouse steps, and every step belonged to her. After the trial, Nell did not go to the ranch. She went to the back room of Ruth Adler's shop, locked the door with the brass key Ruth had given her, and cried for 3 hours. Not from sadness, because it was the first time she had cried without being afraid of who might hear. The room was small, a cot, a basin, a window that stuck. Ruth had cleared it out the week before and put fresh sheets on the cot and a hook on the back of the door and a lock on the front of it. And when she handed Nell the key, she said, "The room is yours. No term. No condition." Nell held the key in her fist and felt the weight of it. A small brass key. An ordinary thing. But it was the first space that had belonged to her since Crane's men put her in a wagon in Helena. The first door she could lock from her own side. The first walls that asked nothing of her. She did not go to the ranch that night. She needed this. Needed to stand in a room alone and know that she could. Needed to lock the door and sit on the cot and listen to the silence and know that it was her silence, not anyone else's. She needed to prove to herself, before anything else, that she could exist in a space without someone else holding the walls up. The next morning she was at the shop counter before Ruth. She had coffee boiling and the first mending project laid out, and the scissors sharpened. And when Ruth came through the door at 5:45, 15 minutes before opening, she stopped and looked at Nell and said nothing. But her eyes said it. The day passed. Customers came. For the first time, some of them greeted Nell by name. Not all, but enough. Mrs. Callahan came back for a skirt she had left, picked it up, ran her thumb along the hem Nell had stitched, and said, "That is fine work. Best I have seen in 20 years. No apology, no mention of the trial. Just respect, small and ordinary and sufficient. Ruth came up beside Nell after Mrs. Callahan left. She did not say anything about what had happened in the courtroom. She did not mention the scar on her wrist or the 20 years of silence she had broken. She picked up her scissors and started cutting fabric and said, "We are behind on the Patterson order. Can you stay late?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do not call me ma'am. Makes me feel dead." In the afternoon, Silas visited Margaret's grave. He walked to the cemetery on the hill beneath the elm tree and stood in front of the mound of earth where the woman he loved lay in the quiet ground. He did not kneel, he did not bow his head. He stood with his hat in his hands, her hat, and he looked at the grave and then at the horizon beyond it. "I met someone," he said. "She is not like you. She is stubborn in a different way. But she looked at me and she did not look away when she saw the worst parts. Same as you used to do." The wind moved through the elm. A hawk circled overhead. "I think you would tell me to stop being a fool and start living again, and I think you would be right. So I am going to try." He paused, touched the brim of the hat. "I do not think I need to come here so much anymore. Not because I have forgotten you, because I have stopped punishing myself for the night I was not here. You died of fever, Margaret." "Not of me. Took me 3 years and a woman with rope scars to understand that." He put the hat back on. "I will still wear it, though. Every day." He turned and walked down the hill. He did not look back. He looked at the horizon. The valley opened out in front of him, wide and golden and full of the kind of light that makes you believe the world is bigger than your grief. 3 days later, Nell walked to the ranch. 4 miles on a dirt road in borrowed shoes. The same road she had traveled the first day, half conscious on the bench of Silas's wagon, barefoot and bleeding and wondering what the price would be. Now she walked it under her own power in her own time, with no one driving and no one carrying her, and no one deciding the direction. She arrived at mid-morning. Silas was in the barn frame, or what would be the barn frame, hammering nails into new timber. He had been rebuilding since the day after the fire. The frame was half up, raw wood golden in the sun, the smell of fresh-cut pine sharp and clean. Nell picked up a hammer and started driving nails without asking. They worked in silence for an hour. Then she asked him about Margaret. He told her, the laugh that could fill a room, the cooking that could empty one, the books she read and explained to him like he was smart enough to understand, the songs she sang when the pipes froze, the way she cried when the old dog got sick, and the way she made him carry it to the creek so it could hear the water one last time. She would have liked you, Silas said. He drove a nail clean and true. She liked stubborn women. Takes one to know one. He almost smiled. Later, when the hammering was done and the light was shifting, Silas reached for Nell's wrist. The scarred one. He touched it gently, ran his thumb over the rope mark, the way you read words written in a language you are only beginning to learn. She did not pull away. Do not be sorry for it, she said. It is a map. It shows where I have been and how far I have come. That evening, Nell walked back to Ruth's shop. She locked the door with the brass key. She lay on the narrow cot and looked at the ceiling and thought about tomorrow. She would walk those 4 miles again, and the day after, and the day after that, until the distance between the two places she belonged became a road she chose to walk, not a road she was running on. 6 weeks after the trial, they found Liddy Fenn. And Nell Sheridan kept the only promise she had ever made to a woman she had never met. She did not look away. Sheriff Coulter's men had come from Fort Benton with shovels and a warrant, and the grim professionalism of men who have done this kind of work before and take no satisfaction in it. They dug behind Crane's barn, in the patch where the wildflowers grew thickest, and 3 feet down they found what the ground had been keeping. The news moved through the territory like fire through dry grass. The territorial marshal took over the case. Crane, held at the county jail in Fort Benton, was charged with murder in addition to unlawful imprisonment, fraud, conspiracy, and arson. He would be tried at the district court. If convicted, he would be sent to the territorial prison at Deer Lodge, where the walls were stone, and the sentences were long, and the kind of power a man held in a small town meant nothing at all. Nell stood in the Copper Bluff Cemetery on a cool October morning as Liddy Fenn was buried. No family came. Liddy had no one. No one except a town that had finally stopped pretending she had never existed. Nell placed wildflowers on the grave, purple and yellow, the same colors that had grown over Liddy in the ground, the same colors Crane had put in a vase on his table the night he welcomed Nell to his home. Your name was Liddy Fenn, Nell said. You bought bread every morning. You liked wildflowers, and you deserved to be remembered. Ruth stood beside her. Her sleeve was buttoned at the wrist again, covering the scar, but something about the way she carried herself had changed. Her shoulders were back, her chin was up. She was a woman who had finally said the thing she had been holding for 20 years, and the saying of it had not destroyed her. It had rebuilt her. Tom stood behind them. His arm was out of the sling now, scarred and stiff, the skin shiny and tight where the burns had healed. He would never swing a hammer quite the same way. That was the cost, and it was real, and he wore it without complaint. Silas stood a little further back. Not from distance, from understanding. This moment belonged to Nell, to the promise she had whispered over a patch of earth weeks ago. I see you, Liddy. I'm not looking away. She was keeping it now in front of the whole town with flowers in her hands and a name on her lips and the full, steady gaze of a woman who had refused from the very beginning to close her eyes. The town had changed. Not completely, not perfectly. A few families who had owed Crane money still looked at Nell sideways, resentful of the disruption, uncomfortable with the exposure of things they had spent years pretending not to see. Mrs. Livy still whispered behind her hand at the mercantile. Old habits die the way old men die, slowly and with a lot of protest. But the majority had shifted. Not a transformation. A turning. The kind of change that happens when a town looks in the mirror and does not like what it sees and decides, not all at once but person by person, to do something different. Henry Potts restored Silas's credit without being asked. Mrs. Norming started leaving bread on Ruth's doorstep in the mornings. No note, no explanation, just bread. Small gestures, ordinary kindnesses. The currency of a community trying to buy back its conscience. A week after the burial, Nell received a letter, postmarked from somewhere in Wyoming. No return address. Vernon's handwriting, shaky and small. I know I do not deserve forgiveness. I am not asking. I just want you to know I think about it every day. About you. About Liddy. I will think about it until I die. Nell read it, folded it, placed it in her new journal, the one Ruth had given her, brown leather, blank pages, a clasp that clicked shut. She did not reply. She would never reply. But she kept the letter. Not out of forgiveness. Out of the belief that some things should be kept, even the painful ones, because they are evidence of what happened, and evidence matters more than comfort. On the ranch, the barn was finished. Silas, Tom, and two neighbors, men who had stood up at the trial, had built it in 4 weeks. It was smaller than the old one, simpler. No wasted space, but it was solid, the joints true, the roof pitched right, the doors hung square. It would hold. One morning, Silas walked out to the new barn and stopped. Tied to the fence post, standing calm and patient in the early light, was a Belgian draft horse, 16 hands, broad-shouldered. The kind of horse that could pull timber from the North Ridge without breaking stride. No rider, no explanation. On the saddle, tucked under the cinch strap, a scrap of paper. 5 words in handwriting he did not recognize, from those who no longer owe. Silas stood looking at the horse for a long time. The gelding poked its head over the stall door and nickered. The Belgian turned its head and looked at Silas with the calm, uncomplicated gaze of an animal that does not know or care about the story that brought it here. Silas touched the horse's neck. Warm, solid, real. He smiled. A small smile. Rusty. Like a gate opening for the first time in years. That afternoon, he walked to the cemetery, stood under the elm, did not kneel. I do not think I need to come back for a while, he said. Not because I have forgotten you. Because I have finally stopped making your grave into a place where I punish myself. You would hate that, Margaret. You would tell me to knock it off and go live. So that is what I'm going to do. He touched the brim of the hat. I will still wear it, he said. Always. The wind moved through the elm. Leaves drifted down, gold and brown, settling on the grave like hands laid gently on sleeping shoulders. He turned. He walked down the hill. He looked at the horizon. Autumn had come to the valley. The cottonwoods along the road were turning gold, and the light was different now, softer, warmer. The kind of light that makes everything look like it is being remembered, even as it is happening. The air smelled like sage and wood smoke, and the particular clean sweetness of cold coming. Nell walked from town to the ranch that afternoon. The road she had walked 100 times now, 4 miles of packed dirt and dry grass and fence lines, and the occasional cluster of cottonwoods where the shade pooled like water. She knew every rut, every curve, every place where the road dipped and the valley opened out and you could see all the way to the mountains. But today she carried something, a trunk. Small, wooden, loaded with everything she owned. Her clothes, the ones Ruth had sewn for her new journal, the brass key, and a bolt of fabric Ruth had pressed into her hands that morning with 2 words, for curtains. She set the trunk on the porch. She took the brass key from her pocket and placed it on the shelf beside the cabin door, next to the jar of nails and the tin of matches and the small carved horse that Margaret had made one winter from a piece of cottonwood. She placed the key where she could see it every day, not because she no longer needed it, because she needed to see it. A reminder that the door at Ruth's shop was still hers, that she could leave whenever she wanted, that staying here was not a sentence. It was a choice she made each morning when she woke. Silas was on the porch sharpening a knife. He looked up, saw her with the trunk, saw the key on the shelf. "You are early," he said. "I am on time," she said. She sat beside him on the step. They looked out at the valley where the evening light was turning everything copper and amber, and the color of things that endure. "Silas," she said. Don't look away. Never." She opened the new journal. The first page was still blank. She had been saving it, waiting for the right words, waiting for the moment when the words would mean what she needed them to mean. She picked up the pen Silas had sharpened for her that morning, a simple steel nib, nothing fancy, but it fit her hand the way the boots fit her feet, close enough to feel like hers. She wrote the first line. "My name is Nell Sheridan. I choose to be here." She closed the book, set it on her knee. Silas placed his hand over hers. She let it stay. Then she stood. She walked off the porch, past the new barn where the Belgian stood with its head over the stall door, ears forward. Past the fence post Silas had driven into the ground the day after Margaret's funeral, pounding it into the earth like he was nailing down the last piece of his old life. Past the clothesline where her dress and his shirt hung side by side in the dying light. She walked out into the open field, alone, in the last of the sun. She stood in the grass with her face toward the mountains. The wind moved through her hair. The sky above her was enormous, the way only Montana sky can be enormous, so wide and deep it makes you feel both small and infinite at the same time. She was not going anywhere. She was not waiting for anyone. She was not running, not hiding, not calculating the distance to the nearest door. She was simply standing on ground that belonged to no one but herself, breathing air that belonged to no one but herself, in a body that belonged to no one but herself. Silas watched from the porch. He saw her out there in the field, lit gold by the last of the sun, her back straight, her head high, the dead woman's boots on her feet and the living woman's pages in her pocket. He saw her, and he did not see the woman he had cut loose from a post in a horse stall. He did not see the woman who had stood in the courthouse and made a judge speechless. He did not see a rescue or a story or a debt repaid. He saw Nell Sheridan, standing in an open field, free. She turned, looked back at him over her shoulder. She did not smile. She did not wave. She did not call out. She just looked, and he looked back. The whole story in one gaze. Every mile, every page, every scar, every door locked and unlocked and chosen. The cup of clean water and the bolt on the door and the note on the table and the wildflowers over the grave and the hand on the back of his neck when the world came down. All of it. Held in the space between two people who had decided, separately and together and over, not to look away. Out in the field, the last of the sun caught the grass and turned it to gold. In the new barn, the Belgian stamped and blew. Tom Birch rode the east road toward home, his healed arm testing the reins, his young face older than it had been 2 months ago, and not sorry about it. Ruth Adler closed the shop and turned the key in her lock, a lock she was no longer afraid of, and walked home through the autumn evening with her sleeves rolled to the elbow and the scars on her wrists open to the cooling air. In the county jail at Fort Benton, Emmett Crane sat alone on a wooden bench, staring at the wall, and for the first time allowed himself to wonder whether the rooms he had built were homes or cages, and whether in the end there was a difference he could live with. But here, on the porch, in the field, in the space between a man and a woman who found each other in a place made of rope and hay and darkness, there was no wall, no rope, no bolt, no cage, just the open ground and the last light, and two people who refused, absolutely refused, to look away. And if this story has found you tonight, wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever dark barn you might be sitting in, I want you to know this. Nell Sheridan was sold for $50. She was tied to a post. She was told she was nothing. She was meant to disappear like the girl before her, silent and forgotten, under wildflowers that nobody planted. But she wrote her name on walls. She held a wooden shard in tied hands. She stood when standing cost everything. She spoke when silence was safer. She walked when walking meant blisters and dirt roads and 4 miles each way in borrowed shoes. And she was no one's property. Ever again. That is the story. That is the whole of it. A man came for a horse and found a woman in chains, and chose not to look away. And that choice cost him a barn, and almost cost him a ranch, and gave him back the one thing he had lost, the night his wife died alone in a cold cabin while he sat in a saloon drowning a boy in the water of his dreams. It gave him back the ability to be present, to stand in the room when the room needed him, to stay. And Nell Sheridan, the woman who never looked away. She took back her name, her story, her voice, her feet, her hands, her days. She took them back 1 page at a time, 1 stitch at a time, 1 locked door at a time. Not because a man on a horse came to save her, because she saved herself. He just handed her a cup of water. Stay with this story. Share it with someone who needs it tonight. And remember the only thing Nell's father ever taught her, that Crane could never take away. The only thing a person truly owns is their word. So here is mine. Don't look away. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.